Imagine a soldier, standing barefoot, bleeding, exhausted, surrounded by Japanese machine gun nests carved into cliffs like steel jaws. He has no rifle, no grenades, no bayonet, just a stone. A palm-sized rock that every other soldier laughed at. A caveman's weapon, but on one of the most vicious Pacific islands of World War II, where even Marines joked that the jungle was trying to kill you, not the Japanese. This man used that same stone to do the impossible. He single-handedly neutralized 9 Japanese gunners in a single day. This is the unbelievable true story of a quiet farm boy from Oklahoma. A man who never wanted glory, never sought medals, never bragged, but became a legend among the U.S. Marines. This is the story of Pute William "Rock Hand" Walters. Opening scene, the Island of Death. Pacific Ocean, 1944. The waves slam against black volcanic cliffs as if the sea itself is angry. Fresh Marines step off the landing craft, boots sinking into ash that feels like powdery sand mixed with hot coal. Among them walks Private Walters, skinny, soft-spoken, barely 20. His helmet too big, his uniform loose, his rifle heavy. But inside his right pocket, he carries his strange little habit, a stone. He always kept one, not for fighting, but to remind himself of home, of the farm, of simpler days before war. Other Marines teased him. "Hey Walters, you gonna throw rocks at the Emperor?" "Careful boys, he's armed, with gravel." "Look, it's the Caveman Marine." Walters only smiled shyly. He never talked back, never fought, but fate was sharpening him for the day when that stone would matter. The ambush, and the day everything changed. It happened on day 11 of the island campaign. The Marines were pinned down by 3 interconnected Japanese bunkers, hidden deep inside the cliffs. Every time the Marines tried to move forward, a roaring burst of 7.7-meter machine gun fire shredded the vegetation and cut men down. The terrain was a nightmare. Sharp rocks, dense jungle, vertical drop-offs, burning sun, the smell of death everywhere, and worst of all, the Japanese fire never stopped. One Marine described it as, "It felt like the machine guns were breathing. You move, they exhale bullets." Platoon Sergeant McKinney crawled beside Walters and yelled over the gunfire, "We need someone to flank them. They'll wipe us out at this rate. We need a runner." Walters looked left, looked right. Everyone else was either wounded or pinned flat. He swallowed hard. "I'll go." The sergeant blinked in disbelief. Walters, the quiet kid, the one who barely spoke, but he nodded. And so began the journey that transformed a shy farm boy into one of the most dangerous men on the island. The long crawl. Walters crawled through thorny bushes, mud, and volcanic ash. Bullets cracked over his helmet. Branches exploded next to his face. He clutched his rifle until a sudden burst hit nearby, sending fragments into his arm. His rifle jammed with dirt. The bolt bent. Useless. He was now unarmed, and the Japanese bunker was only 40 yards away. He whispered to himself, "Think, Will, think." He checked his pockets. Rations, gone. Knife, lost in the mud. Grenades, none left, except his hand touched something round and smooth. A stone. He almost laughed. A stone. That's all he had. But it was heavy, hard, perfectly shaped, and in that moment, a strange kind of calm filled him. The first kill, a soundless death. The first machine gunner sat in a small cave-like opening, focused, firing nonstop. Walters inched closer, closer, until he was only 6 feet away. He knew if he made a sound, if he stepped on one twig, he was dead. He raised the stone slowly, closed his eyes for a brief second, then struck with all the strength he had. The sound was sickening. The gunner collapsed instantly, his helmet falling sideways. Walters froze. He expected shouting. "Return fire," something. Nothing came. He dragged the body back, took the Japanese soldier's belt knife, and crawled deeper inside the cliff. 1 down, 8 to go. The second nest, silent as a shadow. He followed the tunnel system, something the Marines didn't even know existed. Japanese bunkers were often connected underground. A maze of death. Walters crept along the narrow passage until he saw daylight through a small crack. Another gunner, firing in the opposite direction. Completely unaware, Walters lifted the stone again. One precise strike. The second gunner dropped without a sound. Now he had something else. A Japanese grenade. He pocketed it. 2 down. The third gunner, the grenade that changed the fight. This time the nest had 2 Japanese soldiers, one firing, one feeding ammunition. Walters knew he couldn't take them head on. He pulled the pin on the grenade, rolled it quietly under the ammo man's legs, and slid back behind a rock. Boom! The explosion shook the tunnel. Dust, smoke, and screams filled the chamber. When Walters emerged, both men were down. 4 down. But the blast alerted the rest of the bunker network. Voices echoed. Footsteps approached. Now the quiet farm boy had become a hunted man. The chase through the tunnels. Japanese soldiers shouted in anger. Kisama, dokoni? You bastard! Where are you? Walters ran deeper into the maze. He was bleeding, exhausted, coughing from smoke. But adrenaline kept him alive. He stumbled into a small alcove and froze as he saw a Japanese radio man setting up to call reinforcements. The radio man reached for his pistol. Walters reacted first. The stone flew from his hand like a fastball pitch, slamming into the radio man's temple. He fell instantly. Walters retrieved the stone, breathing heavily. 5 down. The machine gun commander. A fight to the death. The tunnel opened into a larger room where the central machine gun team operated. This was the heart of the Japanese defense. The commander spotted Walters immediately. With a roar, he charged with a bayonet. Walters dodged. Barely. The bayonet sliced his arm open. He cried out, grabbed the commander from behind, and slammed the stone against the man's jaw. Once, twice, 3 times. The commander collapsed, unconscious or dead. 6 down. But now the remaining gunners opened fire inside the bunker. Screaming in fury, Walters dove behind ammunition crates. Bullets tore the wood apart. Splinters flew. He had no gun. Only 1 grenade left. And the stone. He whispered, Dad, I hope those farm chores really did make my arms strong. The grenade toss of a lifetime. He pulled the pin, rolled the grenade toward the ammo boxes, and sprinted for the exit tunnel. The explosion behind him was massive. It ripped through the central chamber, killing 2 gunners instantly and burying a third under collapsing rock. 9 down. The entire bunker system shook like an earthquake. Walters stumbled outside into sunlight, coughing, covered in dust and blood. He collapsed on the slope where U.S. Marines were still pinned under fire. Sergeant McKinney grabbed him. Where were you? We thought you were dead. Walters weakly pointed at the cliff behind him. The sergeant turned and saw smoke pouring from the bunker network. Machine gun fire had completely stopped. It was silent, dead silent. 1 man had destroyed the entire Japanese gun position. The aftermath, silence on the ridge. For the first time in 11 days, the ridge was silent. No rattling Type 92 machine guns, no sniper shots, no exploding mortar shells, just the eerie sound of wind sweeping across the black volcanic stone. Sergeant McKinney stared at Walters, dirt-covered, bleeding, shaking, and shouted, Medic, get over here! As the medics tended to Walters' wounds, the other Marines approached slowly, cautiously, as if they were looking at a ghost. Corporal Jenkins whispered, He came out of there? Alone, without a rifle? Another Marine muttered, Man's not human. He's something else. And then someone pointed at Walters' right hand, still clenched tightly around that same stone. They all stared. The stone was cracked, stained with dirt, ash, and blood. Sergeant McKinney knelt beside him. Private, how many did you get? Walters swallowed. I think 9. The Marines froze. 9 Japanese gunners, with a stone, a knife taken from a dead soldier, and a single grenade. The sergeant shook his head in disbelief and patted Walters on the shoulder. Son, if anyone ever mocked that stone again, I'll personally knock their teeth in. The men laughed, but not because it was funny. It was a laugh of shock, relief, and awe. For the first time, they realized they were looking at something rare. A man who could walk into hell and walk back out on his own 2 feet. The official report, and a commander who didn't believe it. When the ridge was finally secured, the Marines radioed headquarters. Major Collins demanded a full assessment of how the bunkers had fallen. When the officers arrived and entered the tunnels, they were stunned. Bodies of Japanese gunners lay exactly where Walters described. The grenade blast had collapsed the central chamber. 1 machine gun was still smoking. The tunnel walls were splattered with signs of close quarters fighting. A helmet lay cracked almost in half, clearly from blunt force impact. But the major still shook his head. He stood over a fallen Japanese commander whose jawbone was shattered. "This is ridiculous," he said. "No Marine punched this man. No rifle butt did this." "What did he use? A hammer?" The sergeant grinned. "No, sir, a stone." The major blinked twice. "A what?" "A stone, sir. Man used a rock like a damn war club." The major stared at the sergeant, then at the cracked helmet on the ground. Finally he muttered, "God help the enemy if this Marine ever gets his hands on a real weapon." The legend spreads like wildfire. By sunset, every Marine on the island had heard the story. Campfires glowed as men whispered, "Did you hear about the kid with the rock? 9 kills in one day. Walked through the tunnels like a ghost." The Japanese never even knew what hit him. In the world of war, where rifles jammed, grenades misfired, and luck decided who lived or died, stories of a man with nothing but a stone struck a chord deep in every Marine's chest. He became a symbol, not of brutality, but of pure survival, of doing whatever it took, of refusing to die. That night, men left small stones outside Walter's tent as a sign of respect, like an offering to a warrior spirit. When he woke up, there were nearly 100 stones. Walters didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The commander's interview. A Marine who didn't want praise. Colonel Hanford, commander of the regiment, summoned Walters for an official debriefing. Walters stood nervously in front of the colonel's desk, hat in hand, eyes lowered. He hated attention. Colonel Hanford flipped through the report, then looked up. "Private Walters, you neutralized an entire Japanese machine gun network. Alone?" Walters hesitated. I did what I had to, sir." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an understatement." He leaned forward. "What made you pick up a stone as a weapon?" Walters shrugged shyly. "I didn't really think about it, sir. It just felt natural. I grew up throwing rocks at coyotes around the farm, so guess old habits helped." The colonel smiled, and something rare. "Private, most men panic when they lose their rifle. You improvised. You adapted. You survived. That's what Marines do." The colonel stood. "Your actions saved dozens of Marines today. You may have saved the entire flank." Walters blinked, surprised. "I did?" "Damn right you did." Then the colonel extended his hand. Walters shook it, unsure what to say. His knuckles were still bruised from gripping the stone. Preparing for the final assault. The next morning, reconnaissance planes revealed a horrifying truth. The ridge Walters cleared was just one of 2 major Japanese firing lines. Behind it lay entrenched snipers, mortar pits, hardened caves, suicide squads, a command bunker stocked with ammunition. If the Marines didn't break the second line, the island campaign would drag on for weeks, costing thousands of lives. The officers gathered Walters for a strategy meeting. McKinney spoke first. "Son, you know those tunnels better than any man alive. You crawled through them. You killed half the men inside. We need your insight." Walters swallowed. "I'll help however I can." The room filled with maps and hastily drawn sketches, many based on Walters' memory of the underground layout. He described every bend, every chamber, every firing slit he saw. For the first time, an entire Marine assault plan was being built around the experience of one quiet farm kid with a stone. A visit from the old-timers. Later that evening, a group of hardened veterans, men who had fought on Guadalcanal, Bougainville, and New Georgia, approached Walters. These were the tough, scarred, battle-worn Marines who usually kept to themselves. Their leader, Sergeant First Class Harlan, stood before him. He had a deep scar across his cheek and eyes that had seen far too much war. "You the kid who used a stone?" Walters nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." Harlan studied him for a long moment. Then he held out a small carved wooden token, a charm carried only by the most respected veterans in the regiment. "We don't give these out to just anybody," Harlan said. "But a man who can sneak into a Japanese bunker and clean house with a damn rock, well, we figure you earned it." Walters took the token with shaking hands. Harlan smirked and added, "Next time you go caveman on the enemy, save at least one guy for the rest of us." The group laughed and walked away. Walters stared at the token for a long time. For a boy who grew up quiet, shy, and often overlooked, this moment meant more than any medal. The night before the final push. As darkness settled over the island, the Marines prepared for the ultimate assault on the Japanese command bunker. Walters' tent mate, Private Dorsey, looked at him nervously. "You scared?" Walters exhaled. "Yeah." Dorsey nodded. Me too. After a long silence, Dorsey asked, "You still got that stone?" Walters looked at his right hand. He hadn't even realized he'd been holding it. "Yeah, still got it." Dorsey chuckled. "Good, 'cause if things go bad tomorrow, I'm hiding behind you." Walters smiled for the first time that day. But deep inside, a storm of fear and determination boiled. He knew the truth. The next battle would be far worse than the first. Because in that command bunker, the Japanese weren't just defending ground. They were defending honor, pride, and their last chance to hold the island. They would fight to the last man, and Walters would once again find himself in the thick of it. Dawn of fire. The final assault begins. At sunrise, American artillery opened up with a roar that shook the earth. Shells smashed into the hillside. Flames burst from cave openings. Smoke poured into the sky. Then the Marines advanced. Walters moved with the first wave, closer to the bunkers than anyone else, because he knew the ground better. Bullets snapped through the air. Mortars exploded. Snipers picked their targets. The jungle became a hurricane of fire and steel. Sergeant McKinney shouted, "Move, move! Push forward!" But the Japanese resistance was ferocious. Dozens of defenders opened fire at once. Several Marines fell immediately. The advance stalled. Men crouched behind rocks, pinned. Some shouted, "We need a path. Someone has to get behind them." Eyes turned to the one man who had done it before. Walters. Sergeant McKinney grabbed his shoulder. "Kid, we need those tunnels again." Walters looked at the hillside. The same dark cave entrance he had crawled out of after killing 9 men. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'm going." McKinney squeezed his arm. "Godspeed, son." With his stone in one hand and a borrowed knife in the other, Walters ran back into the darkness, returned to the dark. The tunnels of death. The cave swallowed him again. The same darkness. The same dripping water. The same suffocating smell of gunpowder and death. But this time the air felt heavier. Walters moved step by step, barely breathing, listening, feeling the earth with his fingertips. Every sound echoed like a ghost whispering in his ear. Behind him the battle raged. Artillery thundered. Marines shouted. Machine guns roared from cliffside openings. But down here, there was only silence. A dangerous silence. The kind of silence that meant the Japanese were waiting. Not sleeping. Not retreating. Waiting. The first contact. The elite defenders. He reached the first chamber, where he had killed 2 gunners the previous day. Now, 3 bodies lay there. The original 2 gunners. And a third, a Marine. The Japanese had dragged the fallen soldier inside and booby-trapped. The entrance with grenades wired to a tripline. Walters froze. Another step. And so, on a forgotten island in the Pacific, a quiet farm boy armed with nothing but courage did what entire platoons could not. He didn't fight for medals. He didn't fight for glory. He fought because the Marines beside him needed him. A stone in his hand. 26 enemies defeated. One impossible mission completed. In a war filled with tanks, aircraft, and steel, one young Marine proved that sometimes the strongest weapon is simply the human spirit. If you enjoyed this story of bravery, survival, and raw determination, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because there are countless untold stories of courage from World War II, and we'll keep bringing them to light. Thanks for watching. Stay fearless and stay curious.